Hello, Goodman Games fans. Welcome to episode 12 of the Scrivenery, where we talk to you about third-party publishing for Goodman Games. And today we're going to take a look at the process of making zines, especially looking at potentially making it yourself, producing it yourself. So I am Ed Stanek. With me is my co-host, Trevor.
Hi, everybody.
And we've got a special guest for this episode. Let me introduce Max Moon from Max Moon Games.
Hello, everyone.
So before we get into today's topic, I do want to make one real brief plug. We had Origins Game Fair just a few days ago, and I know we've talked before about how useful game cons can be for promoting your products. And coming off of a game con, let me just again mention the significance of that. You don't necessarily have to, well, mind you, it helps if you're going to the big cons, Origins, Gary Con, Gen Con, et cetera, et cetera. But if at least you go to your local regional cons, this is a great opportunity for you to promote your products, whether it's an adventure that you run or just an opportunity to get people to see your products. And Origins certainly was a great opportunity for me in that regard this last time around. So just to plug that again, give that real serious consideration if you're not doing that now. If you've got a convention that you can get to, if nothing else, look at the online cons. These two can provide an opportunity for you to get your materials promoted. It's just lacks then the opportunity for you to put physical products into the hands of your players. But with that said, let's move on. So Trevor, give us an introduction to this topic of making zines.
So there's a lot of different things you can do when you're making zines. Obviously, kind of the standard effort is you write up some material, you lay it out in some fashion, and you send it off to a printer and you have it printed, and then you distribute that to your friends and people who might want to buy it and everything. And that's absolutely fine. That's a perfectly valid way to do zines. But you could also kind of get back to the grassroots of zine making, right? And this is something that, for instance, Nick Barron has talked about, kind of the punk aspects of making your own things and making it your own way and everything. And so that can be a lot of fun. It's something that I've dabbled in a little bit. And it's something that Max here has dabbled in quite a bit, as we'll see in this episode. We're going to focus on two different techniques you can use to enhance your zines in tonight's episode. We're going to talk about foil stamping. This is a good example of a foil stamp here. This is a little foil stamp I did on a pocket. And we're going to talk about also silk screening and everything as well. And so, and I believe, Max, I'm pretty sure, was this silk screen? The
Yep.
covers to, yep. So this is a good example of a silk screen. Notice if you can see the sheen, it's still metallic, but this is done with the silk screen process. And we'll describe and show you some images that allow you to understand the difference between the two. The two very different ways of adhering essentially dyes to a piece of paper or whatever it is you're silk screening or hot stamping onto. Doesn't always have to be paper. It could be leather, it could be t-shirts and things like this, and everything. So we're going to focus on these two techniques today, and I thought we'd go ahead and start out by talking about silk screening. So do you want me to just carry on, Ed?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So silk screening can also be, you'll find it referenced as silk screen printing, screen printing, or serigraphy. And how it works is you basically create an image, and you use, in modern techniques, you use a photo sensitive dye, and you paint your screen with this dye. You lay your image down, and wherever the image is, it will block light, and so that ink remains. It can be washed away, and wherever it isn't, it will expose the dye, and it'll set permanently into the screen. I believe there's a solution you can use to wipe it away at the end. This is something I learned to do in high school, as a matter of fact, in my 10th grade graphic design class, and we made some fun things with it and everything at the time, but I haven't touched it in over 25 years. Once you have the screen and you've set it with light, right? And then the dye is set. Then you take water and you basically blast away all the ink that didn't set, and you have your screen. And from there, you can mount it onto a frame, or it comes on a frame. You can mount it down and put your paper underneath it, and use actual printing ink. They sell a couple different types of ink that you can use, and squeegee that through, and it imparts this type of image. That's my rough interpretation of how it goes. Max has actually done it, and everything. So, Elena, if you could pull up image 1, I believe that's an image of something Max is silkscreen. So, Max, if you could just walk us through the process.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull that image up so I can just take a look too. But I can talk a little bit about that screen printing process here. So you mentioned the photo emulsion process of having that painting that light sensitive emulsion onto the screen, exposing that. If you're familiar with like darkroom photography, it's a pretty similar process there. And I actually, when I first started screen printing, I used some different methods because I was really, that can be pretty intimidating to get started with the light sensitive photo emulsion. But one of the things that I did, there's like some blockout fluid where you're essentially just painting. So you can have I would draw directly on the screen with a pencil and paint around it. And then I've got that once that dried. And then moving on to the photo emulsion is great for more complicated images. And I actually have my stencil, my screens made for me at a local screen printing shop here, particularly because some of the work that I do, it has such fine detail and complexity of the image that I really don't trust myself to handle the emulsion process. And it's not that expensive, and the time that it takes for me to do it versus for me to send them the files, have them create that screen for me, and then I know it's really reliable, makes it very worth it to go to that screen shop for having my screen produced.
And
Yep.
my understanding is, Max, if you do it that way, if you have a screen shop produce your screen for you, that's the bulk of the expense, right? Because you don't need the the special lighting. You don't need, for instance, the setup to keep your screen absolutely flat over the image and everything. And you don't have to worry about timing things. There's a whole bunch of finicky details with producing that screen that you just do away with.
Yes, yeah, that part is wonderful. I used to have to, tell everyone, don't go in the basement for the next like however long, and I've got this like light tossed over a pipe hanging above my like screen and all that stuff. And if somebody happened to jump upstairs, it would shake the light. I don't have to deal with any of that. Although I wonder if you can hear it now. My kids are coming around. Dogs, nope. Okay. So that part, it reduces the cost, it reduces the workload and the time, and it's really not a huge expense. Like I think mine, when I'm doing it, it's like I'm getting them hardened as well because I'm making a massive number of prints. Like I'm using like 500 to 1,000 plus prints on the same screen. And so for that, I have them harden it. The whole thing comes out to about $80 to get a screen made. And so then you're just looking at the cost of the ink, the squeegee, a couple of tools. You've got your little ink spatula. Ink's not too expensive. So it's actually an extremely affordable thing. And one of the things I adore about screen printing and printmaking in general, there's this beautiful thing about that process of just creating a print manually, where you really you have this time between I know what's about to happen and seeing what is actually coming out of that. And so it creates this beautiful space, a little bit of tension where I've laid down the ink, I've got my squeegee, I pull that across, maybe I pull it across a couple more times, but then before you actually lift that screen, you really don't know, did I screw it up or not? And it's kind of a beautiful moment when you lift it up and you're like, oh yeah, that's good. And so that, you get used to it to the point where you can do a lot of them quickly and you don't have that same sort of tension every time, but it's still that first print. It always feels good when you're just you pull that first print, you're like, yes, I got this. And so I really enjoy it. I'm a printmaker outside of zine making as well. You mentioned that you started doing, so you got to try screen printing in high school, and actually taught high school art for quite a while and taught screen printing in there. And it was beautiful to just see like kids' faces light up and like be able to like express themselves with this like these visual elements. And like it's a wonderful way to the versatility of what you can print on and what you can do with it. You gain a lot of control over your imagery as well. You can pick, you've got a lot more options with your paper if you're not having to fight your printer, like what paper can my printer handle, things like that. I can go on and on about this, so feel free to like direct me and help me get back to
Sure. Let's
what you
let's
want
just
to.
let's take a second and Elena, if you could show image 1.5 and then 2 and 2.5 so people can see those. And if you could just kind of narrate what we're looking at, Elena, if you could let us know when they're up. Okay.
All right, and so I am not seeing the images yet, so I'm taking a look here. I might have to take just a quick second to pull up the
There you go.
folder. So that you said the first image was that was the making of the screen.
That was all of your different ones, all your different screen options that you've done. This one is the screen with the ink on it and the spatula in the front.
Okay. And I think,
for 12 years.
okay, I am getting into the images right now here. All right, so you said image 1 and 1.5?
We've already done one. This is 1.5.
Okay. Aha. Yeah. Okay. Couple things here. So this is that process. That screen is already made. I've laid down the ink. You see the ink little spatula there. One thing though that I think is wonderful that I didn't know when I first got started, it took me a long time to actually do this, is the hinge clamps. Those two metal clamps in the back make such a huge difference in the printing process. If you want to make many quickly, just being able to have that on those hinge clamps and to lift up and grab your paper out, set it on a drying rack, drop that back down. Your ink stays on there. You've got way more ink than you actually need that you put down on the screen. So you can get that process going really quickly. When I first started doing it, I was printing, picking my screen up, setting it down on the side, pulling things off, picking my screen back up, placing it where I wanted it. And it's just like, and that was coming from, I definitely was like screen printing for me. I got into from like a punk and music side of things. So I was doing things as cheap as I possibly could. And I'm like, I'm not going to buy the like $12 hinge clamps because I'm trying to save money. When it then ended up costing myself a ton of time. Plus ink dries over time. I use water-based ink, which dries much, much quicker than plastisol ink. So that's a consideration. I personally like water-based inks a lot because of how easy they are to clean up and because of just avoiding, like, I'm doing this at like at home studio space. So it's like, that's going in the same sink as my laundry goes into. So I just prefer to keep it like all water-based. But yeah, so the hinge clamps is a huge thing. I find that to be incredibly helpful and can be an easy thing for folks to miss when they're getting started.
Awesome. Elena, how about image 2?
Oh yeah, so this one, here we got like a split fountain where I've got two different color inks I laid down. And this is really fun. And again, one of the things I love about screen printing, you can really experiment and play with how your image lays down. I wish I had one of those. I did this for my contributor copies that I made for folks for Fairyland. So when laying the two separate inks down and then you're pulling that across that squeegee, it'll naturally blend. The first print's going to be pretty well defined unless I do a little like kind of jiggle to it as I squeegee that across. But that's one of the things you can play with screen printing. You've got that one screen, but that screen can end up being like, you've got so much versatility with that. So you can get these really beautiful gradients or ombres where like those colors blend into each other, and you can play with that however you want. Challenge there that happens is that ink is not really reusable in the same way. Like you're not going to put that back and scrape like your green and your purple back in. But you can always set that aside and save that as a mixed color, because by the end of it, it's gonna blend much more. But yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, it looked like a fun process. Elena, how about image 2.5, please?
So here I've got, this was like the very first zine, like role-playing game zine I made, and 12 years, which is a solo game. And I was hanging all of my prints, and that worked great until I started needing to make tons more. I was like, instead of stringing across the basement, I finally invested in a big drying rack and spring loaded, so I can just real quick get everything onto a space where it can dry. But it's really easy to just like, this clothesline was here from when we got the house, and I'm like, that plus binder clips, and I've got myself a nice long drying rack. Plus it just looks nice when you walk into the basement and there's like a whole bunch of prints hanging. So,
How long does that take to dry?
oh, the water-based inks don't take very long at all. And there's kind of a difference between dry and actually dry. Like dry enough that I can stack them and have some pressure on them. There's still a little bit of moisture in there for a while. But I would say maybe like 10 minutes to dry and feel like good, like to touch that. And it depends on the a few things there, but like the image is going to make a big difference. If you have a big area of lots of ink and blocks, that's going to take a little longer to dry. There's a few other things at play, but one of the things I think is really interesting is if I cure my inks when I print on fabric or things that are going to be washed. And when I say cure the ink, I'm heating it up to a certain temperature where like it is basically becoming plastic at that point and it's not going to wash out. I don't cure my inks on paper. Nobody's putting their zines in the washing machine on purpose, and if they are, they're ruined anyways. But when I do like back patches and stuff, then I'll cure that. And I notice like it can have sat for a while and feel totally dry, but I put that heat press down to cure it, and there's like I can feel the steam after I like come lift that up. And I've always thought that was interesting, just how much moisture lives in there even after it feels totally dry.
So you've gotten into the swing of this, and we see the number of copies there, and I'm guessing it's somewhere on the order of about 12 or so. How long does it take to do that, to produce this set here that we see?
Oh, let's see. I've been doing this a lot more. Like the zine making has got me. I do them in runs of 60 to 100 now, and it takes me about an hour to do 60 to 100
well, there you go.
prints. But I've been doing it a lot. And it also, the first, on my 2-color prints, the first color is fast. The second color is slow because of registration. I'll just give an example in my, got this one that I screen printed as well. And you'll see there's 2 colors of ink there. And so having to get that to all line up makes the second color quite a bit slower. So even though it's like the same number of prints, it takes me almost twice as long for the second color.
But the beauty of this is you can mix the exact color you want.
Yeah.
Right. This is not like where you've got a list of 20 colors you can choose from. The arsenal of inks that you can use. And are you using? I mean, and so there are different. We can talk inks in just a second. Do you use? Is it a variant of a printer's ink or what?
There's a screen printing specific ink, and I've actually experimented with like making my own inks and using things like nori paste with pigment, and I make my own dip pen ink from like walnuts and stuff. So I like to like tinker around with that. And one of my goals is like nori paste is edible. Walnut, you really shouldn't eat that stuff. You can eat the nuts, but the husk is not. But I'm like, I want sometimes to make edible inks. So I'm getting a little sidetracked because I get excited about that side of things. Can you repeat the question though again? You were asking about type of ink.
So I mean, basically, you can buy a vast array of inks and then mix them to get variants of those colors. There's almost no limitation to what you can produce.
Yeah, and
in terms of color.
You can also get just a transparent base and do your own pigments for that base. There's such an infinite amount of inks available So you really can probably find a really close color to what you're looking for already. But there's also fun additives you can experiment with. I actually just picked up a puff additive. So
Okay.
that I can get that puffy shirt 90s effect going on a zine cover at some point. I haven't figured out what project that's for, but I know I gotta do that. I gotta do some like a puffy paint zine cover. So
Yeah, that's so. Is that a glass base? The puffy. So when I was doing graphic design, we had a glass like sand like thing that you would add to the paint, and you'd run it under a heat machine, and it would puff up, and it would be and it was a fascinating process to look at. Really neat. I mean, very not economical in terms of like flat product, but
yeah.
yeah. So cool. Yeah. There's a lot you can do. So now once you've silk screened your product, we have a cover done, right? And then you are what I think what you told me before when we were talking, you're laser printing the inside of your booklets yourself. And then and they may be, these look like this one's all in black and white, and it's gorgeous. Um, and then what you're doing from there is you're folding the pages by hand, or you have a folder. What kind of folder do you use?
Yeah, actually use an old booklet machine that
Yep.
work well. And I just like don't use the stapling side of the things. So it's like just got a big handle. I can line things up nicely. It's got some good like bars on it that help to like make sure everything's in there. And then I just crank back and it'll fold it. It's like my pre-fold because I'm still folding them and still going
Mhm.
over them with a bone folder because with the it just like saves a lot of time because I don't have to sit and measure that out by hand and then like fold and like do the separate. So it's like um it's it's like this old literally busted up like parts bent machine that I got for super cheap. And because I'm like I only need one part of it to be working.
Right.
But that ends up saving me a ton of time. The booklet machines are pretty cool, and you could like if I weren't doing thicker paper and thicker like for a zine of like 20 pages, you could probably get that working great and have like staples in there perfectly aligned every time. And that's yeah, those are a little pricey and it's kind of an unusual item, but um yeah, so I do
So
that and then bone folder
yep. Just
and
so people understand what a bone folder is, this is a bone folder. This is literally probably a piece of cow bone. They also come in Teflon, and they come in other hard plastics, and they come in various shapes. And so, for instance, you have a pointy end, which you might want to do some tucking with or something to get into something. Then you have a rounded end, and they make a gorgeous tight fold. And so these are relatively inexpensive. They're a couple dollars each. If you really get inventive, you can make your own. Just go down to your local butcher and tell them you need some ribs without the meat on it, and everything. And then when I was folding paper, I don't even use a machine. I just have a board with a lip at the bottom, and we just fold it in half. And there's all you're looking for is the registration on one edge. And as long as it's nice and tight, you can just score it with your folder and move on. And that's something that you can do literally. I do it while I'm watching old movies that I really know well, so I can follow along with the movie and kill time. And you can kick out quite a bit of booklets really quick. Now yours, this is it looks like it's about 48 pages. So then you're going ahead and you're stapling it, and do I have a good image here? It's hard to see, but do you see that flare? These are gold staples that match the silk screening. And so we were talking about staples just a little bit in the pre-show. But you have a Boss Stitch stapler, which is image 3. Elena, if you could please show that. Thank you, ma'am. And I believe next to this image is a little box of like green metallic staples and everything. So would you mind talking a little bit about your stapling situation and highlight some staple places, ways you find colored staples? I mean, because they're out there, they're not. Someone needs to funnel all that to one site.
yeah, office supplies are like such a weird thing that like if you want a particular sometimes it can just be this like deep web of like chaos. You'd think
Yeah.
that, I don't know, but like I guess colored staples aren't that prevalent, but it's one of those things where there's an infinite number of them made, but like no, not a great central. It's like they should have a place named after me called like Max's office, or like a
Like
deep
Office Max.
Like Office Max.
yeah. Um,
Or just Staples, right?
Staples.
there
You
you
know?
go. Yeah.
Get all your staples there.
Um, I bet they have colored staples there. The thing that gets tricky is if you have a color you want, and so it's just like that part has been like trying to find just like a deep internet dive. And I mentioned this when we were talking a little right before the show, right? But like I had even like experimented with ordering some staples off of Etsy and then discovered that they were actually just like someone hand painted the staples and the like glitter, and it was like too chunky. But now I'm like, I want to try that myself as well. But I've been really, yeah, one of the things I've noticed with staples and colored staples is that sometimes the staples, like they're like an anodized thing where then that's great. And like you flip it over and it's like silver, and I've noticed that it can flake off on some and some it doesn't at all. So I'm trying to build up my like toolkit of like which staples I know the like color holds up really nicely on. So there's some that are like anodized and some that are like painted, and then some that are like fully anodized both sides. And so that stuff's been it's chaotic, but it's I love it. I think the Fiddler's Green zine, it's like an occult zine, like pagan stuff that I'm obsessed with. And they had like these brass staples that matched the foil on their stamped cover. And I was just like, that was the first time it really hit me how powerful just a little accent like a staple could be. And it's so affordable to do. So if you're already doing this stuff yourself, that's just such an easy flourish to give it.
Yeah, and they're just little details that that make a big impact, right? And like I said, it's hard to see with this background. The other thing you've been practicing when you do your hand staples and everything, and this issue doesn't have it unfortunately, is you've been putting in silk ribbons as well, right?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, I just recently was investigating the fact that when we talk about hot foil stamping in a minute, they have hot foil stampers just for ribbon.
Oh, interesting.
And so they have these little hot foil stamping machines. They're not very big, and they literally, you cartridge in your ribbon, and you can put 3 or 4 silk ribbons in at a time, and you just kind of, there's a button, you just push it, and it just moves it along and moves it along and moves it along. Really neat. So okay, so once you've got your booklets made, you've got them creased, you've done all your silk screening and everything, you've got your super snazzy cool staples, and you're going to go ahead and staple them. But a book this thick is not going to be nice and clean like this. What kind of cutter are you using? And you're doing that by yourself, right?
That I've got a stack cutter.
Okay.
That was actually like not too expensive, pretty similar to like your like guillotine cutter, but that's also something I didn't originally have. I was trimming those by hand, just pressing down, straight edge, and like I just you know what, this right here, that box cutter, I don't go anywhere without that in my life because it's too useful. But just lightly trimming, and like you don't press hardly at all. You want to lightly trim if you're doing it by hand, and then you'll just eventually get that nice even cut. But then, you know, that's one of the things Kickstarter's great about. After my first one, I was like, oh, I can afford to like throw some of this money at equipment, and a stack cutter is nice. It like applies the pressure. You just crank that down, and then as opposed to like a swing arm, that can start to pull and you can get a little crooked. But with
this
a
is
stack
a direct
cutter,
pressure.
yep, and it holds it in place really nicely, get you a nice trimmed edge. So that's been incredibly useful.
That is very cool. Yeah, I have with the equipment that I recently purchased, I have an antique guillotine. It weighs like 1,500 pounds. It took 7 of us to move it.
Awesome.
And everything, but it's got a 22-inch depth, and it's all cast iron, right? And I have yet to play with it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That will be really cool. Okay, so at that point, you've basically produced a zine on your own using a laser printer, some screen, and some ink, and it's got a really nice custom look, right? And on top of that, I believe you also silk screened the box that it came in. So did you have to make? I just have one question about that. Did you actually have to make like a stand for this to sit in? Or did you elevate your hinge clamps? How did you do that?
Both of those things. So I have a board that I just like screwed into my workstation that is just about that same thickness. And then because I am terrible at cutting wood, I called up Andy Weber, who does illustrations for me a lot. And he's also a luthier, and he's like my guy when I need wood cut. It's like, can you just cut me a 6x9 piece of wood that's like the right thickness? And so that just sets where the box goes. So I put the lid from the box on that piece of wood so it doesn't crush itself. So when I'm applying that pressure from the screen printing, if I do that on a box lid without any support under it, then it will crush it, or at least damage it. So having that support under there is nice. And actually, I also use I cut up a mouse pad and put that on that piece of wood just so there's a little give there. I don't know if I can explain why that matters, but it feels good. And when it feels right, I just like, and the print's good, I'll keep doing that same thing. So that's where I like to pretend that this is a mystical thing. So yeah.
Well, awesome. So okay, so at that point, let's just kind of summarize down to tools. If somebody wanted to get started at a basic level with silk screening, say they wanted to do some covers or something of their own, even if they did some covers and then gave them to a local printer and said, here's what I want you to use as the cover, right? What are the bare minimum tools they need to really get started in the silk screening process?
Sure. And I'm going to add real quick for I've started doing just that of silk screening covers, and then I've got a couple people here who are really like their thing is printing RPG zines, and so they've been helping me out when I have these large print runs, and it is a dream. It's wonderful. But the basic tools. So you've got okay. Well, before I go through like a list, one thing I want to say, I was just talking to someone about this recently. A lot of times people skimp on the squeegee and underestimate just how important the squeegee is. The squeegee is so critical to getting a good print. You've got your screen, everything's nice, but that squeegee is really controlling a lot about how the ink floods. So don't skimp on the squeegee. Find out the right durometer, and that's the hardness of the rubber of the squeegee to match the screen and the ink that you're using. So that's the one piece I just want to say, I've seen a lot of like kits where it comes with a terrible squeegee and people think they're doing it wrong. No, if you've got bad tools, that's going to be fighting you on it. So
now an art supply place or your printer where you had your screen printed or made, they should be able to give you some guidance on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So don't forget to just ask an expert. Always a good option.
Yeah, totally. I always ask about like mesh count and durometer. I let them know, here's my plans. Help me on some of these like really technical details, because that will change things a lot.
That's right. So speaking of screens really quick, sorry to interrupt. The mesh count you need for something like a t-shirt, right, is different than the mesh count you need for a box lid or a piece of paper.
Yeah, and the type of ink you're using is also going to impact that. And while ask an expert is really incredibly important, also don't trust the experts because they always tell you the right way to do things, and you can do some really cool things the wrong way. For example, I always get a mesh count that isn't really supposed to work with the type of ink that I use, but I've done it so many times, I know this metallic ink works with this mesh count, even though if I talk to experts, they will say those don't work together, and the prints come out beautiful. So that's the kind of thing where sometimes what shouldn't work works, and your ultimately experience is always far more important than truth. So the tools, though, you've got your screen, your hinge clamps. your squeegee, a palette knife. That's
Ink.
yeah.
That's
You're,
it.
you're beside, yeah. And
And
then washing it out, make sure you got a space to do that.
and I think I priced it out that those tools should run you or could run you as little as $60 to $80.
Yep.
And everything for your first screen. And then remember the hinge clamps, the squeegee is likely to be reusable, and the palette knife and everything is reusable. And obviously, you may or may not be swapping out ink every time, but quite a bit of that is actually reusable time after time after time. And so the real expense, once you get set up and you have maybe a couple of squeegees, and squeegees weren't that expensive when I looked at them. They were like $16 to $30 or something.
Yeah.
For the range of squeegee, I mean, if you're using really big paper, that changes it quite a bit. But you're not talking about a lot of money investiture to get going on a silk screening process. And so it's something you can try out very effectively on your own.
Yeah,
great. Okay, so what are your future ideas? Just to kind of wrap up silk screening, what are your future ideas for projects, things you might silk screen, different ways you might use the silk screen process, and everything. Let me ask you this question. You may have ideas, but I do have one question. Can I silk screen something and then send it to a printer for printing? If I want to say put a half tone behind it or something, and I want it to be extremely, I want to have control over that. Can you print on top of a silk screen?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been curious about that, but I have not wanted to try that on my printer. I've tried that. I have two, so I have a backup now, so I might give that a shot. The reason for that is because I mentioned the heat process for curing the ink, and with that laser printer, we're talking about that heat fusing the ink to the paper. So my nervousness is that we're also going to be getting that heat sensitive ink in the fuser. So I'm not sure on that, but I have been thinking about playing around with that. But it's one of those things where, like, when I'm ready for this printer to die, then I'll start experimenting with some more stuff.
But you could also try just an inkjet printer, right? Which has no heat applications at all.
Yeah, that's true. An inkjet printer would be interesting to try on that, because I'm curious. I'm very curious how that would work.
Well, your volume cost starts to become significantly greater in that case.
Yeah. It depends on the type of inkjet printer you're using too. When they were using the small cartridges, there are several of these. What are they called? Like they've got a brand new type, HP and Epson and everything have these tankless printers, or cartridgeless printers. They've got big tanks, and you basically just squeegee in ink, and the ink prices plummet at that point. And the truth is they have been doing this for years. If you print at Mixam, my understanding is if you've got the Indigo 7000 printer, that's an industrial scale inkjet printer, right? And stuff. So I mean, these companies know that they can get, they've got these big tankless systems now, and so that can help you with prices. Of course, you've got to buy a new printer, but okay, great. Any last comments or thoughts on silk screening?
I guess one of the things you were asking about new processes, I started doing foiling, and I've been doing laser toner fusing foiling, but I've also been starting to experiment with screen printing foiling because of that, wanting to foil those boxes. And also I've been looking at the foil stamping like you've done. So that's something I've been playing around a little bit with, and I've been fighting it because it's, like I said, I like doing things the wrong way. So I've been using the wrong types of things and seeing what happens. And I finally, after like so many tries, give up. But that's one of my things I've been want to tinker with. I've gotten some like glitter additive, because I'd like to play around with like taking a little more control over those inks, and the puff paint additive, so I can kind of get it to like have some more textural elements. Yeah,
very cool. So we're going to transition, unless there are any questions, and I don't see any in the chat. we're going to go ahead and transition over to foiling. And again, foiling is a process. Foiling can be known as foil stamping, hot foiling, heat foiling, hot stamping, heat stamping. There's a whole host of terms associated with it. But effectively what you're doing is you're taking a dried ink or dye that's usually powderized, and it's been adhered to a very thin sheet of plastic, right? And you're applying a dye of some shape. Here I've got a smoking worm logo, or the sign that sits outside of the smoking worm and so you create a dye, and you use that as the heat transfer agent to hit that piece of plastic with the the dried dye facing down on towards your paper, and then it basically adheres it to it. That's a hot stamping process. There's another way to do foil stamping, and that is using a laser printer, if I remember correctly, and that's what Max does. And so I thought it would be good, while we had Max on the show, to talk about the two different processes. One of them is substantially more expensive than the other, and you really need to be, you really need to be thinking, I'm going to do a lot of this to make it worth it. But the other one, if you've got a laser printer, you can buy foil very inexpensively, and I'll let Max talk about where he gets his foil from and stuff in just a second. But it is not a massively expensive process, and it can be just as beautiful. It can really render some good, some cool stuff. As a matter of fact, Alana, could you show image 4? And Max, do you just want to talk about your process of using a laser jet heat foil while Alana brings up image 4? And then Alana, about 30 seconds after you've shown image 4, let's swap over to image 5.
As I'm looking at image 4, I think that is the wrong image.
Do I have the wrong one? I'm sorry, did I make a mistake?
Okay. But I've got something here I can show.
Oh, is this silk screen then? What we're seeing, the house?
This one is that is a game that I picked up that I love, The House on the Borderland, based on William Hope Hopkins.
Got it. Okay.
So that's not a me thing, but I think it's a gorgeous cover, and I played that game, and it is really good. Highly recommend it.
So why don't you show us something you've done?
Yeah. So here is one of the foil ones. So you see that that gold, much more reflective. Just giving that a little bit more, because it's always hard to capture in camera. You never really can. You never really can get the foil to show up on camera the same way it does in person. But it's very similar to the hot foil stamping process, in that you have that foil that is adhering to an adhesive and then peeling off. But unlike that process where you have the foil that's backed with an adhesive, it's actually using the toner as the adhesive, because that toner is just like basically a plastic. And when it gets hot enough, it melts. And so you get it heated up to just the right temperature where it's essentially melting a little bit, but not to the point of like changing the image or destroying the image at all. And I do that on covers, but I've also been doing that on interiors as well. You can mask things. You can use a piece of parchment paper to cover the text so that you're not ending up getting the areas you don't want to foil messed up. So there's actually a lot you can do with that, but it's essentially you lay that foil down and whatever image has been printed on the paper. So I've got like black ink on black paper, so it's kind of hard to see, but if you've got a color piece of paper and you're printing black ink, you can see really well where that's going. And then it's intended to be run through basically like an industrial laminator. And there are some like crafting versions you can get, like Heidi Swap Mink or something like that. But with an industrial laminator, you're going to get more control over the temperature and stuff, so you can fine tune your adjustments. I use a heat press, and part of that is just because it gives me more like, it doesn't need to be flat. And it's not like running through and taking time like going through a laminator would, where I do one at a time. So with a heat press, I'm able to lay that down, press that. I've set the temperature to the temperature I want it to be, but I've also been working on seeing if I can figure out ways to do this with screen printing and laser foiling, like using the laser foil with a screen print, with a screen, not using screen printing ink, but using these other adhesives. So that's one that I'm tinkering with. That's my little like science experiment that is only going wrong, but occasionally it's so close to going right. So I'm still working on that because I'm hoping I can like pull that off with doing boxes. But one of the things I think is really spectacular about this is it's great for prototyping. So I can just like, you know what, I got this idea for this monster illustration. Let me try printing that up. I just print that out. I grab a piece of foil, lay that on top, press it. And now I can see, yep, that's what I want. That's also a good way to catch things like, is the, you know, the, when we're thinking about our darks and lights in our image, well, if you're using like a reflective foil, that's going to be probably your light space. But if you're using a dark reflective foil on the, like, you might have to like tinker a little bit to see if you need to invert the image, things like that. And it can be a really good way to test things out too. If you want to do something larger, to test out a couple different images, and you're only paying the cost of the paper and the foil to test a few out before maybe getting that die made, which you know, that's something I really enjoy about the laser foiling process, is just the rapidity of it. And I'm even like, occasionally I've just seen somebody posted something, I was like, hey, I'm gonna make a foil version of that for you just because I just want to make you one. And I tell you, it's only gonna take me like 15 minutes to get that done. So yeah.
So if you were to do a batch of 100, what's the time on that? Once you've printed the images, you've got your foil, and foil is only got for you, it's only got a one shot use, and that's garbage, right?
Yep.
And then so you're cutting maybe pre-cutting a 100 sheets of foil or something, so you know exactly what's going to go down. How long does it take for you to stamp through 100 or whatever?
Well, I am with this is another thing where the heat press speeds it up a lot. With the laminator, you got to wait for it to run through. With the heat press, I'm doing like 10-15 seconds per press. So I don't do batches of 100 because one of the things that it happens is there's a little bit of off gassing, so it'll start to smell. So I'll stop after about 40 and take a break and make sure that I'm not like going fume crazy, and like go get some fresh air, stuff like that. So that is something to consider. It's not a big deal like doing one or two, but doing larger runs, I would either, if you're going to do a lot of them, then you'll want some ventilation. But if you're doing like 10 or 20, no problem. So that's something where I don't do this for big runs because it's a little bit less forgiving. Like if I have some errors, it's not like it's going to be one error. It's probably like some quirk has gone wrong, and I might be repeating that error and wasting foil along the way. So I keep these to limited editions whenever I'm doing my my foil runs. So I think like, yeah, that's a really long answer for what was intended as like, how much time does it take?
It takes a long time. No, it doesn't take long, but and you're using about 15 seconds of press. So in terms of tools, can you give us kind of a ballpark of how much your heat press cost and how much foil costs? Because those are really, other than your laser printer, those are the only tools you're using.
Yep. So heat press was about $200. I got just like a small, cheap heat press because I'm like, I'm not going to use this a ton. I'm going to try this out. I'm probably going to upgrade my heat press at some point because I've got some issues with that being plastic. It kind of bends a little. So that's something, it's a good starter one. But it's a similar cost as like a laminator would be as well. So not super affordable, but definitely like accessible. That's really the only tool. The foil is you can, if you want to buy a lot of foil, you can get it dirt cheap. If you want to buy a little bit of foil, it all of a sudden is extremely expensive. So like 5 sheets of foil that are about like 6 by 9, you're probably looking at like $9. But if you want to buy a roll of foil that will last you and your entire family's like generations on into the future, that's probably like $40. So it's one of those things. If you find a foil you really like, I mean, gold is the cheapest because it's the most commonly used. So it's really easy to find gold foil. I also discovered that a lot of places will have scrap foil because they're doing these images on large rolls, and folks have been saying they've been able to get scrap foil for cheap or free. So that's something that like I've been kind of curious to check out, but I use deco foil right now. That's what I've been most happy with. And I was able to connect with them and get set up at like a wholesale cost. And so that ends up being cheaper. But yeah, it can be a little bit pricey if you're not doing many. If you're doing a lot, then it's going to be a lot more affordable.
Yeah, and rolls of foil. I mean, you can find them on Amazon. You can find them almost anywhere.
Yeah.
So they're pretty accessible. And they, again, like ink, they come in a wide variety of colors, and they come in different intensities of sheen and gloss. Right. So you can buy them in matte. You can buy them in kind of a satin finish. You can get them in like you had there, which was a high gloss, which is really pretty. They come in a lot of varieties of colors. Here's a box that I actually had. This is before I got my machine. I had this one printed and you know, die stamped and stuff. And so that's more of a brassy gold, and everything. They come in a lot of different ways of doing it. My understanding is if you dial it in right, you could even use heavy parchment paper with an iron at the very, you know, minimum. It has to be no more than like 200, 250 degrees. I'm not sure what you set your heat press at, but you could iron it in, right? And that would take a little bit longer, but it's probably even cheaper for you because many people own an iron or have a mom or something, or somebody who crafts who has an iron, right? So there's a couple ways to do that. That's the cheap way to do it. You could also go the expensive route, which I have recently gone down that rabbit hole when I purchased a bookbindery's worth of equipment. And it came with two antique, you know, hot foil stamping machines. And it turns out I've got two of them. I've got a Pledger, which is out of, I think it's John Pledger, was a bookbinding machinist who invented numerous bookbinding machines in Chicago in like the 1920s. And he has a whole series of books on his presses of different types of machines he built. And the Pledger stamp is one of the stamping machine is one of them. And then I also have what is called a Kensal stamper. And these are vertical press stampers that use a lot of pressure to quickly move through. It takes me about, well, I do 5 counts, so about 5 seconds to press an image without a problem. And so we're moving through it. And it takes me about, in the end, 20 to 30 seconds to foil stamp any one given thing, at least when I was working on, say, these little envelopes. And so once you have those machines and they're available on the used machine market, you can find them on eBay. It turns out my Kensal was originally used in the 40s and 50s for television, and before they had what is it, the teleprompters, they would actually foil prompt, right? And so they would foil print onto card, and they would hold that up for the people to read. And so they had these Kensals would sit on the stage right next to the cameras, and they would be sitting there working all this out and holding up teleprompters as they went, and everything and stuff. And so because the reflection could be seen from the lights above the presenters and stuff, they could see that in the darkness. And so this is a refurbished machine. They last forever. They're made out of cast iron. Elena, if you could please show image 6. What you do here is you're using a die to transfer that heat. And so these machines have basically a big heater on their core. They have an aluminum or a steel plate, and then you adhere that image to it. There it is. This is the smoking worm negative image. This is a small brass die. It's about 3 inches, well, about 2 inches tall and about 1.5 inches to 2 inches wide. It cost about $70 to make, and then some money to ship it to me. They're made overnight, which is amazing. You know, the company actually had shipped it the same day they produced it. I paid for it, and so they're super quick. And what you do is you adhere that, like I said, to the heat plate, and then that slots in, and the whole thing heats up. And then you have a table. And if you show image 7, Elena, please, this will be a workbench. And what you want to look at is you want to look at the rightmost image, which is my pledger stamper. On the left side is, I'm sorry, the left side is the pledger. The right side is the Kensol, which is what I've been using so far. And so you basically, as a tabletop, I set up little dies, right? So I actually use pieces of cardstock. This is it right here. And so that big machine there on the right is the one you want to look at. That's the Kensol with a big lever arm. And so what I do is I set up 2 register marks, and then I can take my flattened piece of paper here, right? And it's really easy. We cut out the foil ahead of time because they come on rolls. I slot that in. I slap a piece of foil down, clamp 1 to 5 count up. That comes off. The next one goes on, and I can do that once I have everything set up. You can do about 3 of these a minute. And so that's the foil stamping process, and then the gluing process is a whole other issue. So that's how that works. And then yeah, and actually, if you show image 8, Alana, please, that's the little sleeves I actually produced on a Cricut, which is a hobbyist. It's essentially like a little CNC cutter for paper and plastic, and everything. So that image shows the 2 sleeves that I get out of an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper or cardstock, and then those come off, and I stack them up and work with them from there.
Question for you, Trevor.
There it is. Yeah, question?
So are you getting like a nice little deboss of the image? Because that's something I can't get with the process I'm using.
So you can, if you have enough, if you've got it set right and your paper's got a little bit of air to it, right? So if you've got a thick kind of, I don't want to call it puffy paper, but if your paper's got a little bit of debossability in it, right, it could take an image. And there's special papers that you use for that, right? So special cardstock. This is simply Nina Astro Bright Black, and so it's a fairly common cardstock, but it looks gorgeous when you foil stamp onto it, and it holds up really well. It's pretty durable, and everything. But yes, you can also with this machine emboss, deboss, and a whole bunch of other things. So it's got a lot of practical uses when you really get into that. And so debossing is, let me get this straight. Debossing is when you're puffing things up, right? Embossing is when you're pushing them down, or maybe I have that backwards. But
I get them mixed up I think everybody gets those mixed up.
Yeah, you need a different die, and the company that makes the hot foil stamping dies makes both of those dies as well. And I believe that you can use the debossing die as a hot foil stamp die too. You just use the top part, not the bottom part. Anyway, it gets a little more complicated, and I haven't tried that yet. Once you've done that, it works pretty well. The only pieces of equipment you need are a die, the stamping machine, and the foil. Obviously, that's the more expensive route to go here, right? I mean, those machines cost $1,000 to $2,500. On most markets, I got mine a little cheaper than that because, like I said, I bought a whole bunch of equipment at once. But they last forever, and they will literally do millions of impressions, and everything. And there's a lot of customization you can do on that. And so I've had a lot of fun playing with that too. So that's ink foil, or I mean, hot foiling. You can do it the cheap way, you can do it the expensive way. Both produce great results. Both use the same type of foil, which is great. And they both have different applications at scale depending on how you're going to do it, because I actually think that a Kensol or something like that is a lot faster if you're doing bulk than if you were just working through either your heat stamp or whatnot. And it's a one process instead of a laser copy everything. And that's the other thing I can do is I can actually use paper that can't be laser printed, right? So there's a whole range of papers that I have access to that you can't run through a laser, printer machine. Not that I mean, that's just the downside to the laser printing method. That's not a big issue. Any questions? I don't see any in the chat, so hopefully I've explained that well. My experience is that foil costs, I only buy it in rolls. And so, because that's the cheapest way to buy it, it costs about $4 for a 3-inch roll, all the way up to, $15 to $30 for like an 11 or 9 to 12-inch roll, depending on the foil you're getting. And they come with a lot of varieties. You can get kind of rainbow shimmery stuff. You can get stuff that's solid colors, not metallic, like black and blue and yellow and all these things. And so there's a lot of different ways you can use it. All right. Ed, do you have any questions? I mean, that's hot foil stamping in a nutshell. Yeah.
No, actually, you guys kind of touched on them, the ones I did have in mind as you went along. So that took care of that.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I think that's it. That's a pretty solid episode. We've talked about 2 different techniques. Max, it's been great to have you on. You have a Kickstarter coming up, if I remember correctly. You were telling me about it. Do you want to give that a quick plug and let people know about it?
Yeah, so launching Tuesday is Abyss of Hallucinations Volume 2, and that is my Morkborg setting based off of Aleister Crowley's Book of Lies. So it is going to be just as evil as it is joyful and full of love. So that is going to be, that's my like two color screen printing, super fancy one. And you can follow along. Easiest way to find it is just go to maxmoongames.com, and that'll link you anywhere you need to go. But yep, that is launching. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening with that one. Collaborating with Exalted Funeral on this so that I'm not giving myself severe carpal tunnel again, which I did last time around. So that's a thing. But they've been incredibly helpful and super supportive of keeping all the like eccentricities that I want for this to like look really beautiful and have a feel of like being invited to a wedding. So yeah.
Very cool. Will there be multiple color silk screening throughout, or just on the cover?
That one's it's just silk screen cover, and it's the one that I do the 2-color print for. So here's from like volume 1, and then this is a reprint of Aleister Crowley's Book of Lies. And so they use the same white screen, but then 2 different gold screens. Got the back images there. So fun stuff to play with there. Then we will also have a box that is got some gorgeous art from Luciana Lupe Vasconcelos, and then David Hoskins is illustrating some monsters for this as well. Lots of cool stuff happening. Really beautiful shirt that's going to be coming along with that as well, from Dark Transmissions, the Megatherian. Yeah.
Sounds great. I mean, can't wait to see it. We'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to check out our show this week. I'd like to thank Ed, my co-host, and Elena, as always, not seen, but really
couldn't happen without her.
Absolutely. And obviously, we'd like to thank Goodman Games for helping us put on this production and everything. With that, is there anything else, Ed?
No, I think we've got it there.
All right, everybody.
Good, informative set of data about making your own zines.
Yep. We'll see you soon, everybody. Have a good evening.
All right. Good night.
Bye.